All righty. Well, thank you again, Wendy, for that beautiful and always perfect quote. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. We want to acknowledge each and every one and thank them. And today we want to talk a little bit about what is the spiritual or metaphysical interpretation of fatherhood. Now, as I said on Mother's Day, and I'll say it again today, I know it's a tough holiday for many people. Right? So our fathers may no longer be with us, and we may miss them dearly. We may not have known our father, completely unknown to us. Or perhaps our father was caught up in working through his own issues and not able to give us the time and the attention and the love that we feel fathers should. You know, it's kind of interesting. Many of us grew up with TV, and the image of the TV dad coming home and smoking his pipe and reading the paper and all those things was kind of given to us, and life is not like that, you see, and we didn't know that it wasn't like that. So some of us have bitter memories, bittersweet memories. And they can heal and they can pass, and I just want you to know that. But no matter where you are today with regard to the actual relationship with a father in your life, I'm inviting you to consider today that is a symbol, that is an image, that is not exactly what we're talking about today. We are talking about this idea of God as a father, or God as the father. What does that mean to us on our journey of self-discovery? You know. So you remember 2 weeks ago I thought it was Father's Day, and I sent out the email, and in it I talked about Magritte's painting, The Treachery of Images. And it is a painting of a tobacco pipe, a curved stem tobacco pipe, like Sherlock Holmes smoked in the movies. And there's a text on it in French. He was Belgium, and I guess he spoke French, and he wrote on there, "This is not a pipe. This is not a pipe." Now, the first time I ever saw that, I thought it was a trick question, you know. Like, if you hold the painting and turn it sideways and squint your eyes and all these kind of things with the optical illusions, is it going to turn into something else? But it was not an optical illusion. He was pointing out the illusion of our minds, of our consciousness, of the way that we decide things, the way that we form our opinions. See, it's not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe. It is a symbol of a pipe. It represents a pipe. It looks just like a pipe. It had tobacco in the bowl, and it had a little waft of smoke coming out of the bowl. But it's not a pipe, you see. It is only an image of the pipe. And I think he was trying to tell us that we have to be careful when we have an image or a symbol of something. We tend to think not metaphorically in terms that the thing is that, you know. We kind of literally associate it. And in our culture here in the U.S., which predominantly religious philosophy here comes to us from the Middle East, and in that culture, they used the symbolism, the image of God as a father. And I think in many cases we have come to take that literally. We have come to take it that we think that God should be like a big human father who sits up in the sky, you know, who bounces us on his knee, who gives us treats when we are good, who punishes us when we are bad. And we totally lose if we are stuck in the image. We totally lose the symbolism of what that is and what that means. Now, we've even gone further in our culture in that we have created Santa Claus. And Santa Claus is exactly that, an old man with a long white beard who sits on a throne, who observes everything we do and writes it down in a book and decides whether we are naughty or nice and whether we are going to get presents or coal and all those kind of things. And what we want to do today is we want to step through the veil. We want to step through the image, you know. I remember being a little kid, and we had a parish hall in town, which was a nightclub in the days of the 20s and the 30s. And in later years, it became the parish hall, and it was just a big open floor, you know, where they would have had tables set up. There was a bar room in one corner. There was a kitchen where food would come out. And up in front there was a stage, and then behind that there were several dressing rooms where the entertainers would prepare to come out and do their act. And they had a big movie screen that would come down. It was fitted with a movie screen, I guess, in later years when the church took it over. And yeah, I don't know if you have these memories, but Parish Hall is at one end of town and the school was at the other. It was about a mile between them. And then we would walk in formation with our little corduroy pants going whoop, 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 all along the way. And we would get down there and they'd put out folding chairs. And then they would show us a movie with the old 16 millimeter projectors going, clack, and then the film would break and all those kind of things. But they would shine it on that screen. And one day I had to go back in the back while the movie was showing and get something. I don't know whether the teacher sent me back there. And I was kind of amazed that you could see the movie from the other side of the screen. I didn't know that. I didn't know that before, you know. So the movie was being projected on one side, but you could go beyond that. So you could go beyond that. So what we're talking about doing today is we have this screen in front of us, in front of our field of awareness. We have this image on this screen that our society talks about with God as the Father. But there's so much more beyond that, where that image is projected, you see. And if we stop right there at the screen, we're missing out everything that it represents, because the image is not the thing. The idea of God as a human father is not God. But it helps us because this is the problem that we face in I think all attempts at coming to understand the divine, which is, it is beyond words. It is before words. It is that which words come from. Right? So we have some type of a concept, and that concept kind of takes some form of an image, perhaps, you know, a physical, like a picture, in our consciousness, and then we try to find words to describe what we're seeing. Now, I realize this is just one way that we might consider the thought process, but the point is that there's something before the words. Before the words come, there's something that precedes them. Now, in using words, in using our language, we have to understand the great limitations of language and communicating by language. Right? So the speaker has some type of an idea, something that they want to communicate. And then they search through their vocabulary. I'm chuckling because that was never my strong suit. They search through their vocabulary and try to find a word that they think represents that idea. And then they say that word. And that word, the audible sound gets transmitted, but it may get trampled upon. There may be background noise, you know. Perhaps the receiver, the person receiving is hard of hearing. Perhaps they're distracted. Perhaps something else is going on. But somehow they get what they think is what that person said, and then they try to interpret it as to what they mean. And what the person thinks this person meant is not always the same thing. I'm watching right now in public view up in Charlotte, there's a big controversy going on about a historic site. And people are getting on social media and people are getting on TV and they're being interviewed and everybody is talking about what was said. There was a person who wrote a letter that, or a flyer for an event that kind of started this. And I have the flyer, I read the flyer. And the point I'm getting to is that people say, well, he said this and he said that and he said the other thing, and he meant this and he meant that and he meant the other thing. And none of it's in the flyer. None of it's there. See? The interpretation is all within them. So we have this issue then in that in the culture that the Middle Eastern culture that gave us our concept of God as a father, the relationship, the role, the responsibility of a father in that family was significant. And what the symbolism is that is that God is significant. God is significant. Now we have to understand that there are two kind of main denominations, or two, I won't say denominations, but two divisions within religious philosophy. And one has goddess religions and one has God religions, female and male. And the goddess religions tended to be the more agrarian society, the planters and the people who raised animals and those things. And the male gods were the wanderers, the nomads, Now, people who grew up in an environment where life was relatively easy, like if you lived in a lush environment, imagine living in the Pacific Island, and you just, if you wanted to eat, you just went out and picked something off the tree, or you went down a lagoon and you caught a fish. Life was easy. And they had a totally different view of what the Creator was like. And it tended to be loving and harmonious, and the purpose of life was joy and to find expression. And the religions tended to have a figurehead that was represented feminine, the feminine principle. And then in other parts of the world, like the Middle East, life was tough. Can you imagine trying to live in a desert, trying to grow food in the desert, trying to find water in the desert? This is why the 91st Psalm tells us, abide in the shadow of the Almighty. You know how important a shadow was in the heat of the day, you see. So in these areas where life was tough, the figurehead, the symbol for religion tended to be the male. Aggressive, assertive, rough and tough, and could take care of people in the midst of all of the troubles. Not that women can't do that. I'm not talking about male and female. I'm talking about masculine principle and feminine principle. Now, if you go a little bit further to the east, if you go to the Orient, we get the amazing symbol of the yin and the yang. I know everybody's seen this. It's a circle. And it's divided in half, but it's not divided in half abruptly like you and I would do here in the West. We would divide a line vertically or horizontally. Give me half a circle. Okay, there's a half a circle. No, it was curved. There's an S curve that goes through the circle. Okay? It's still in half, but it's gentler, you see. It flows. There's a meaning there. And half of the circle is black, half of the circle. There's contrast there. There's the yin and the yang. There's the female. But within the black, there is a tiny circle of white, and within the white, there is a tiny circle of black. And it's kind of a different and perhaps better representation than saying male and female, man and woman, and all those kind of things. Because for us here, we don't get the symbolism. We have to think about it. We have to try to understand it. Yet if I said to you father and mother, you would have all these preconceived notions about what that means. And what I'm suggesting here today is we have to move beyond the preconceived notions and understand the symbolism of God as a father. So in the Middle East, in the culture from which the predominant religious philosophy in our country comes to us, the relationship of the father and the firstborn son was the most important relationship in terms of power and money. Right? When the father died, the firstborn son inherited the property. It was the son's responsibility then to take care of the mother. The mother did not inherit the property. Now, I even found this in this country when I went back and was doing some genealogy. I found an ancestor who died in the early 1800s, and I found his will. And in his will, the way that it was written, and since then I've seen other wills, it said that his wife could continue to have use of the home until she passed, and then the son, the oldest son, got it. So the symbolism then that we get is that God is the Father, and the Christ was the only begotten Son, the firstborn Son, is kind of a projection of this most important relationship. Now, of course, then we have to come to realize as we grow spiritually that we are all the begotten. We are all a representation or an expression of that divine life. And therefore we are all to some degree the only begotten. Meister Eckhart said that there wasn't only one only begotten, that the divine is always begetting the only begotten. We are all these individualized expressions of the divine. So the point there is that when our religions tell us that God is a father, it is not a physical father, it's not a human father, it is not an old man with a white beard sitting on the throne. But the relationship that we have, the relationship between the divine and ourselves, is the most important, is the sacred, you see. So if we come to this idea of whatever God is ineffable, we cannot describe it. We don't have words to describe it. So we use images and we use pictures. And the problem there is that not only is the language insufficient, but because our relationship with the divine is an experience, it cannot be communicated well at all. And the example we use in class all the time is chocolate. If you never had chocolate, there are no words that I can find to help you understand what chocolate is like. You have to taste the chocolate. And even with that, I have no idea of whether or not your experience in tasting chocolate is the same as mine. So when we're trying to talk about this experience of the divine, we use these images, we use these symbols, we use these similes and metaphors, and we use all these things, but none of that is God. So what Dr. Holmes asks us to consider when we are kind of considering these things is think of masculine principle and feminine principle. Now, this is not that one is better than the other, and it is not that we are only one or the other. We are both. You and I are both. And he uses the term Father, Mother God, because the divine must have both the masculine principle and the feminine principle. And by that, we're not talking male and female. We're going to explain this in just a second. But God is all. God is all. The amazing thing, that when I love to read about physics and what they're doing in the colliders and all those things. And let me tell you, I barely understand any of it other than it's fascinating. It's fascinating. If you want to think about this, and we get this imagery, by the way, in the tree of life from Jewish mysticism in the Kabbalah. There's one. The divine is one. But when it comes into physical manifestation on this plane of existence, it comes in pairs. Masculine and feminine, male and female. Two halves of the same whole, two parts of the same whole. So from the one, we get two. And then from the two, we get four, and so on, and so on, and so on. In the colliders, in the super colliders, when the physicists bring into physical manifestation particles, right? They come in pairs. They come in complementary pairs. They have a property called spin, which I don't quite understand, but it is opposite. If one has a certain spin, the other one has the opposite spin. And this is not rotation as you and I would think about it. It's something else. Now, the fascinating thing about spin is that if one of the pairs of the particle is manipulated in such a way as to change its spin, the other one automatically changes its spin instantaneously. Instantaneously. And it does so regardless of the distance between the two. If you're interested, Google Bell's theorem after service. So these two particles can be light years apart. But if one changes, the other instantly changes to mirror it. They are still joined. They are still joined somehow, some way. Right? And then the physicists get into, well, is the universe non-local? Is time and space an illusion? All these other things that are just fascinating. But the point is that from the one comes into this physical manifestation as a pair. As a pair. This meaning of honor your father and mother as a pair. You see, it comes in as a pair. So we look at one part of that pair and we attribute to it things that we call masculine characteristics, or as Holmes would call it, the masculine principle. We could just as easily call it yin or yang or anything. Last Wednesday night we were talking about the comedian Steve Allen, and I used to watch his show when I was a kid before it became the Tonight Show, and he used to make up words. He used to say, why don't we make up this word? What would this word mean? And it was silly, but it kind of shows us how arbitrary words are. So whatever word, whatever term we want to think of, there is this part of us, of you and I, that has will, and it has volition, and it can think, and consciously it can be aware of its thought. It is self-aware, and it can choose. And that's what Holmes is calling the masculine principle. That is what he's talking about when we say God is the Father. Not a human being living up in space. Now, Holmes took the circle and he divided it into thirds very abruptly. Two horizontal lines equidistant apart. Circle is divided into thirds. The top he called spirit. The middle he called mind or law. And the bottom he called body. In traditional Christianity, we would say this is the Father. This is the Holy Spirit, which is the doer of the word. This is the Son. Now the idea is that top part of the circle is the doing, is the choosing, is the deciding. It has will, it has volition. It is the speaker, if you want to think of it again in terms of Jewish mysticism, the speaker. So here's something interesting, is that in some terms we talk about, well, there's the mineral kingdom, there is the vegetable kingdom, There is the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. And then Thomas Troward told us there's the fifth kingdom, the spiritual kingdom. But in Jewish mysticism, they say there is the mineral, there is the vegetable, there is the animal, and there is the speaker. The speaker. Until we become the speaker of our own lives, until we start to act as the father of our own experience by using will and volition and choosing and deciding, we are still functioning at basic levels as the animal level within us. Not that the animal level is less than or wrong or not good. It just means that we're kind of coming more from instinct and impulse and not from deliberate choice. So if we go back to Dr. Holmes's circle, then he tells us that, then what happens is the speaker speaks its word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. It became the body. In the beginning, we talked about this last week, in the beginning, right, there was chaos, there was confusion, there was darkness. And then Spirit moved upon the face of the waters, spoke its word, said, "Let there be." This part that spoke its word, that said, "Let there be," is what we are talking about as the spiritual or metaphysical representation of fatherhood. Because in that culture from which this idea comes to us, it was the father who made the decisions. It was he who chose. It was he who had the resources. It was he who had the responsibility and those sorts of things. I'm not saying that that's the way that no one else can make decisions, but that's the symbol that we want to get with. That's the symbol that we want to understand. Now, once the word is spoken, it moves down. If you think of the circle divided into thirds, the image that I gave you from Dr. Holmes, there's usually a V that's drawn within it. A line comes down and a line goes up. Some religious science churches have turned this into a beautiful symbol with art. Some have jewelry. And the circle has three different colors, for like the sky and the earth and the water. And it's a seagull. The V is actually a seagull on there. But the symbolism is the divine part that has will and volition, that which we are calling the masculine principle or the spiritual father, speaks its word, and that word is dropped into the creative medium of law, of mind, of the feminine principle. Just as in procreation, the seed of the male is dropped into the female, and there it is nurtured, and it grows, and a miracle occurs, you see. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. But how was it made flesh? Through the activity of the law, of the mind, of the receptive feminine principle according to Holmes. Just masculine and feminine because it kind of matches what we see in nature. The word moves down through the circle until it becomes the physical outpicturing of the Word. The Word was made flesh. But then there is an awareness, there is an appreciation that kind of moves back up to the divine. So the idea that we get is that the divine creates through us for its own pleasure, for its own enjoyment. It enjoys its creation in some new way, as you and I, through you and I, you see? You and I speak our word. Our word goes into that same law. Our word manifests as the conditions in our lives, and we too experience and enjoy, or not, the consequences of what we have sown, what we have created. So the idea that we are trying to get to, the idea that he is trying to give us is this, is if we look in the biblical terms that come to us from what we would call the Old Testament and the New Testament, this image of God as the Father is an image of protection. It is an image of caring. It is an image of right action. You know, we were told that the parent, what parent would give a child a rock instead of a piece of bread, or a snake instead of a piece of fish? And we don't understand that because we didn't live in that culture. We don't know what that means, right? Dr. Rocco Errico does a great job of explaining it to us. So as the nomads moved about, as they moved about and they lived in their tents, they had the flat bread. And the way that they kept the bread, the way that they stored the bread, was there was little flat rocks. So the bread might be piled up with little flat rocks in between it to keep it flat. And dried fish was kept in a jar. So if a child was hungry at night, the parent might reach into the jar and get a piece of dried fish. Reach into whatever container the bread was in and get a piece of bread and give the child a little food to eat, to satisfy it, to help it to get back to sleep. But they were in a desert, you see, and sometimes lizards would get in with the fish. Sometimes the flat rocks would break up into little pieces. So this loving, this nurturing, this caring, you see, this image that we get, we don't understand because we didn't come from that culture. What parent would give a child a rock instead of a piece of bread? If you put your hand in there in the dark and you come up with something, you're going to look at that, right? You're going to check that out. You're not going to give that to your baby until you're sure you know what it is. Same thing with a piece of fish. You're going to pull it up. You're going to look at that. Is that a piece of fish, or did a lizard get in there? So we get this image then that is usually kind of given to us as a good shepherd, the idea of a good shepherd. Or in New Testament, in the parable of the prodigal son, we have the father plays a particular role in that. So let's look a little bit at this idea of a good shepherd. What we want to do now is again, remember what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take us past the symbolism of saying, well, God is a father. Because we get that and we say, oh yeah, well, I understand what that means. I understand what father means. Just like folks reading the letter and getting all upset about what they think it means. We want to get past that and understand, what is spiritual fatherhood in my life? What is the relationship that I have with the divine? And then when am I responsible and accountable for using this principle, this direction, this choosing, this will, this volition, this deciding in my life? So we're given the 23rd Psalm, which is a beautiful psalm of comfort, and it says, the Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. I shall not want. Shepherds me. Right? So in that culture, a shepherd cared for the creatures. They did not raise the sheep and the goats for meat. They raised the goats for milk. They raised the lambs for their wool. They were like pets. The shepherds called them their children. They gave them names as you and I would name our dogs and our cats. And they cared for them, you see. So much so that, for example, if an animal fell and broke its leg and the shepherd had to put it down, they wouldn't waste it. They would eat the meat. And the neighbors would say, may you never have meat on your table again. It wasn't a curse, it was a blessing. May you never lose one of your little friends again. So you have to get this image then of the shepherd who loves and who cares for and who looks after the sheep. The Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. Whatever I need has already been provided. See? He leads me to the green pastures. Not the brown, dried out grass, not not the grass that hasn't come up yet, but the green pastures, the lush pastures. He makes me not only to eat there, but to lie down there, to rest, to enjoy. He leads me beside the still waters, not the water so fast that it'll wash me away, not the water so slow it's stagnant. He restores my soul. He restores my soul. And this is what our spiritual growth is all about. We have come into this world and we have had the experience from the first time we took our breath. We have had the experience of the physical, of the intellect, of the consciousness, of the will, of deciding and all, and we are not aware of our soul. And we are trying to remember that. I got a new insight this morning. I was thinking of the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, And the first creation was Adam, which meant clay man, right? So in this story, God takes 100 pounds of clay and he molds it into the shape of a man and breathes life into it. And that was the first creation. He's missing something. He's missing something. The man principle is missing something. And he's lonely. And he tells God, I need something. And God puts him into a deep sleep and removes a rib from his side and creates Eve, which represents the soul. Now in Buddhism, the Buddha is born from his mother's side. There's symbolism here. There's symbolism here. We're not talking about male and female. We're talking about symbolism here. And so the one consciousness is of the head, of the intellect, of thought, of reason, of power and control and all those things. You might consider those things to be the first three chakras in the Hindu system. But when we get to the heart, when we get to where the ribs are, when we get to where the side is, we start to get to the feminine principle. See, Adam by himself was not complete. Eve by herself was complete. Together, the yin and the yang. They are two parts of the same whole. They are the two particles that have come into creation with opposite spins, but perfectly complemented. So we take this symbolism then, we take this image then of divine fatherhood, of God as the protector, of God as the shepherd. Yea, though we walk through the valley of death, we shall fear no evil, for thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Right? So as the shepherd moved through the little narrow spaces between the rocks, the shadows, the valley of death, the predators would hide in the shadows. And if the little lambs, the little goats kind of wandered too far away, they could be eaten by the wolves or whatever predators there were. They learned to stay very, very close to the shepherd because the shepherd had the rod and the staff to protect them. So get this image then. Get this image that we get from whoever wrote Psalms. Typically they say it's David. That there is this in the universe which loves us and cares for us and protects us as a father would in that culture, as a good shepherd would in that culture. And now we take it to an even deeper level. So you see, because these attributes that Dr. Holmes tells us of will and of volition and of choosing and all of those things, they exist within each one of us regardless of the bodies that we have. We all possess and must understand and must properly use the balance, the yin, the yang, the balance that is within us. We must choose, we must decide, we must have our intention. This is the most important thing, I think, in any spiritual lesson we're going to have, is what is your intention? What do you want to have happen here today? Most of the time we don't even think about that. We get up in the morning, put the coffee on, turn on the radio, and go about our day. What do you want to have happen here today? You must exercise that creative principle in your lives. You must choose. Now, here is the kicker. Just because you don't consciously choose does not mean that the law is not responding to you. It is done unto you according to your belief. So if you don't choose, then whatever you believe unconsciously or subliminally is the better word, that's what's going to appear in your life. So I was reading a little bit in Osho this morning, and he said, so many people are just bored with life because they're not creating their own life. They are just kind of observing things as they come along, looking at it, criticizing it, fearing it, being outraged at it, all of those things, but they're not creating it, you see. This is something we used to teach in leadership. You know, you can fear the future, you can react to the future, or you can create the future. And we were trying to encourage the leaders to have a vision for where they were going and try to lead the organization towards that vision. Wendy gave us the image of this light that leads us, you see. Are we reacting to life? Are we afraid of life? Or are we creative in our life? So in this regard, then, we are all the fathers of our own experience, each and every one of us. The divine will not do for us what it has created us to do for ourselves. We are the ones accountable for the seeds that we are sowing. We are accountable for the things that we are believing, because we experience the consequences of those things. No one else, just us. We have been given the ability to choose, and we have been given the responsibility to choose, and we have been given the accountability of experiencing the outpicturing, the physical manifestation, the bottom part of that circle, which is a reflection of what we have been sowing. As you reap, you shall sow. You shall cast your bread upon the waters, and it shall return unto you. Isaiah said, my word shall not return unto me void. All of these different things that we can go back and look at are telling us the same thing. Each of us is a creative force in our lives. We don't create the power, we direct the power. Okay? I didn't make the electricity that's shining that light above my head, but I did flip that switch. I went over and flipped that switch. The decision to flip the switch, the will to flip the switch, the volition to flip the switch, that is what we would say is the fatherhood principle. Once I flipped that switch, the law of electricity, or the law of functioning as the law of electricity, made that light light. We must recognize then, when Scripture gives us this symbol of God as the Father, that is not God. That is a symbol. It is pointing us to something deeper. We have to get around the other side of that projection screen and see. It is pointing us to something deeper. It is pointing us to this idea that the relationship that you and I have with the divine is the most important relationship there is. It is pointing us to the fact that that which has created us out of itself loves us as it loves itself, and the gifts have already been given. We lack nothing. The Lord shepherds us. But we must do that thing that only we can do, which is to invoke the creative process by choosing, by use of our will, not to force something to happen, but to decide. You see, the correct use of willpower is decide. I decided to turn that light on, and I flipped the switch. I didn't sit here and scrunch my face. Willpower to flip the switch. I didn't go over and yell at the switch, try to dominate it. I used my willpower to decide. Then I did what needed to be done. I flipped the switch. We must each make our connection with this spiritual aspect of ourselves that Holmes called the masculine principle. The spiritual father within each and every one of us. We must choose. We must use our will. We must decide. And then we must sow our seed into the law through our spiritual practice and our spiritual discipline of treatment. In this regard, we become the creators or co-creators, if we would rather say that, of our own lives. If we are bored with living, we must create something new. If we are afraid of living, we must create something we are not afraid of. You are the only one who can be, in this regard, you're the only one who can be both your own father and your own mother. But you must decide to do that. You must have the intention to do that. It all starts with intention. What is the future that you are creating today? What is it you intend to have happen today? How much time have you given that today? Become your own spiritual father. Make up your mind. Then do it. And so it is.